The coffee pot shattered against the linoleum floor at exactly 6:47 in the morning, and Grace Holloway knew it was going to be one of those days. Brown liquid spread across the yellow tiles like a stain on her already exhausting life, and her youngest, Emma, started crying from the living room where she'd been watching cartoons before school. "It's okay, baby," Grace called out, her voice strained as she grabbed the mop from the closet. "Mama just dropped something." Just drop something. That's what she always said. Just drop the ball on getting Tommy to his soccer practice on time. Just dropped the rent payment into the mailbox 2 days late. Just dropped another piece of her dignity every time she had to ask her boss for an advance on her paycheck. Grace was 34 years old, though most days she felt decades older. Her dark hair, which she used to wear long and loose, was now pulled back in a perpetual ponytail. Practical, forgettable. The lines around her eyes had deepened in the 2 years since David left, carved there by betrayal and exhaustion in equal measure. She worked double shifts at Rosie's Diner on the edge of town, serving breakfast to truckers and lunch to the courthouse crowd, smiling until her cheeks ached, pretending she wasn't drowning. 4 kids. 4 beautiful, hungry, growing kids who needed shoes and school supplies and birthday cakes and hope. Tommy was 12, old enough to see through her brave facade. Lily was 10, tender-hearted and anxious. Jake was 7, wild and fearless. And Emma, sweet Emma, was only 5, still young enough to believe that everything would be okay because Mama said so. David had been charming once, full of promises and grand plans. He'd work construction when he felt like it, came home unpredictable and moody, always with an excuse for why the bills weren't paid, always with another scheme that would make them rich. Then came the final betrayal, the emptied bank account, the forged signature on the loan papers, the note left on the kitchen table that said he'd found someone who appreciated him. The insurance from their marriage had run out 6 months ago. Grace finished mopping up the coffee, checked the time, 6:53, and started herding the kids toward the door. Backpacks, lunch boxes, permission slips. The morning routine was a military operation, and she was a general running on fumes. "Mom, I need $5 for the field trip," Lily said as they climbed into their ancient Honda Civic, the one with the check engine light that had been glowing like a warning beacon for 3 months. "When's the field trip, honey?" "Friday." That gave Grace 4 days to find $5 she didn't have. "I'll get it to you, sweetheart, I promise." She dropped the kids at school, waved goodbye with forced cheerfulness, and drove to the diner. The morning shift blurred into afternoon, eggs over easy, pancakes with extra syrup, coffee refills, smile and nod, smile and nod. Her feet throbbed, her back screamed, everything hurt. "Grace, you got a letter here," Rosie called from behind the counter around 2 in the afternoon. Rosie was in her 60s, had owned the diner for 30 years, and had a heart bigger than her considerable frame. "Came yesterday, but you rushed out before I could give it to you. Looks official." Grace wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope. Heavy cream-colored paper, the kind that meant business. The return address read Morrison and Associates, Attorneys at Law, with an address in some place called Millbrook, 3 hours north in the mountains. Her first thought was panic. Had she forgotten to pay something? Was someone suing her? Could you sue someone who had nothing? "You okay, hon?" Rosie asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine." Grace slipped the envelope into her apron pocket. "Just need a minute." She ducked into the small office in the back, the one that smelled like old coffee and cigarettes, even though Rosie had quit smoking 5 years ago. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and pulled out a letter. "Dear Miss Holloway, we regret to inform you of the death of your great-uncle Howard Marsh, who passed away on October 19th of this year. As his only surviving relative, you have been named the sole beneficiary of his estate. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the transfer of property specifically the Marigold Hotel located at 247 Mountain View Road, Millbrook. Grace read the letter 3 times. Howard Marsh. The name stirred something in the back of her memory. Her grandmother had mentioned him once or twice years ago. Her mother's uncle, estranged from the family for reasons no one had ever fully explained. He'd moved away before Grace was born, and as far as she knew, no one had heard from him in decades. And now he was dead, and he'd left her a hotel. By the end of her shift, news had spread through the diner like wildfire. Grace became the center of attention, something she'd never wanted. The regulars had opinions, and they weren't shy about sharing them. "Hotels are money pits," said Old Man Patterson, who'd been eating the same lunch at the same booth for 20 years. "My cousin bought a motel once. Bankrupted him inside of 2 years. You should sell it immediately," added Mrs. Chen, who worked at the real estate office down the street, "before you're on the hook for property taxes and maintenance." "What's the place called again?" asked Derek, one of the truckers. He pulled out his phone. "The Marigold, let me look it up." His face fell as he scrolled. Oh, Grace, honey, you might want to see this." He turned his phone around. The screen showed an old photo of what might have once been a grand building, 3 stories of Victorian architecture with a wraparound porch and ornate trim. But the photo was dated. In the comments below, it told a different story. Been abandoned for years. Millbrook's basically a ghost town since the mill closed. My dad says that place is cursed. Total teardown. Not worth the land it's sitting on. Grace watched her brief flicker of hope. She hadn't even realized she'd been hoping, die in her chest. Of course it was worthless. Of course, the one thing that had fallen into her lap was just another burden, another weight to carry. "You should just sign it over to the bank or whatever," Derek said, not unkindly. "Cut your losses." That weekend, Grace did something she'd never done before. She asked for help. She called her neighbor Patricia, a retired teacher who sometimes watched the kids in emergencies. She called her boss and begged for 3 days off. She checked their bank account, 232 hours, and calculated that they had just enough gas money to make the drive. "We're going on an adventure," she told the kids Monday morning. "What kind of adventure?" Tommy asked, suspicious. At 12, he'd learned to be wary of sudden changes. "We're going to see a hotel in the mountains. It belonged to my great-uncle, and now it's ours." "Are we moving there?" Lily asked, her voice small. Grace took a breath. "I don't know yet, honey. We're just going to look at it. See what we've got." Have any of you ever received news that completely changed your perspective on life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories of unexpected moments that shifted everything. The drive north took longer than expected. The highway gave way to winding mountain roads, and the trees closed in around them, brilliant with autumn color. Reds and golds and oranges that looked almost artificial in their vibrancy. The GPS signal wavered and died somewhere around the 2-hour mark, forcing Grace to rely on increasingly vague road signs. Millbrook appeared suddenly around a curve, and Grace's heart sank. The town looked like something time had forgotten. Main Street was 3 blocks long, lined with buildings that had clearly seen better days. Half the storefronts were empty, windows dusty or boarded up. The few businesses that remained, a general store, a post office, a diner even more rundown than Rosie's, had a defeated air about them. "This place is creepy," Jake announced from the back seat. "It's just quiet," Grace said, though she felt the same unease. There were people around, a few cars parked on the street, an elderly man sweeping the sidewalk in front of the general store, but the town felt hollow, like a photograph of itself. The GPS kicked back in just long enough to direct them up a narrow, winding road that climbed the mountainside. The trees grew thicker here, and the sunlight barely penetrated the canopy. Grace's hands tightened on the steering wheel as the road turned to gravel. then to barely more than a dirt path. And then there it was. The Marigold Hotel rose from the landscape like a monument to forgotten grandeur. 3 stories of Victorian architecture, just like in the photo. But the reality was devastating. Paint had peeled away in long strips, revealing weathered wood beneath. Several windows on the upper floors were broken, dark openings that resembled missing teeth. The wraparound porch sagged dangerously on one side, and vines had consumed much of the eastern wall, climbing all the way to the roof. "Oh my God," Grace whispered. She pulled the car to a stop in what might have once been a circular drive, now overgrown with weeds. For a long moment, no one moved. Even the kids were silent, staring at the building. "Mom," Tommy said finally, "we can't live here." "I know," Grace's voice was barely audible. "I know, baby." She'd been an idiot, a desperate, foolish idiot who'd let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, something good could happen. But this wasn't good. This was a disaster waiting to crush what little hope she had left. "I want to go home," Emma whimpered. "We will," Grace said, blinking back tears. "We just need to. I need to look inside for legal reasons. Then we'll go." She got out of the car, her legs stiff from the drive. The October wind cut through her jacket, carrying the smell of decay and old wood. Dead leaves skittered across the porch as she approached the front steps, testing each one carefully before putting her full weight down. The front door was massive, dark wood with an oval window of colored glass, or what had been colored glass. Now it was just fragments, held together by spiderweb cracks. Grace tried the handle, locked of course. She walked around the side of the building, the kids trailing behind her like uncertain ducklings. Broken furniture was piled against one wall, chairs with missing legs, a dresser with all its drawers scattered on the ground beside it. More shattered windows, a rusted fire escape that looked like it would collapse if you breathed on it. And then near what must have been the kitchen entrance, she saw it. A small door, barely more than 4 feet tall, half hidden by overgrown bushes. A service entrance maybe, or access to a cellar. It was open. "Stay behind me," Grace told the kids. She pushed the door wider and peered inside. Darkness and the smell of must. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The narrow passage opened into what was clearly a basement. Old storage rooms with wooden shelves lined with jars covered in decades of dust. Grace moved forward carefully. The kids pressed close behind her. At the far end, she found stairs leading up. The door at the top was unlocked. They emerged into what must have been the hotel's main kitchen, a vast space with an ancient gas stove, a prep island the size of Grace's entire kitchen at home, and a walk-in pantry. Everything was covered in dust and debris, but the foundation of it was incredible. Professional grade, the kind of kitchen that could serve 100 guests. Beyond the kitchen was a dining room with a crystal chandelier, half the crystals missing, hanging over tables still set with china, as if the guests had simply vanished mid-meal. Then a lobby with a grand staircase, wide enough for 6 people to walk abreast, curving up to the second floor. "Whoa," Jake breathed. Despite everything, the decay, the dirt, the absolute catastrophe of it all, Grace began to see what it had been. Grand, beautiful. The kind of place people would have traveled to, celebrated in, made memories in. "Mom, look!" Lily was pointing to a wall covered in framed photographs. Grace moved closer, shining her phone light on them. Black and white images of the hotel in its glory days. The porch full of rocking chairs, all occupied. The dining room packed with people in their Sunday best. A jazz band in the lobby. A wedding on the front lawn. And in several of the photos, a man, tall, thin, with kind eyes and a slight smile. Her great uncle, she realized. Howard Marsh. He looked content in these pictures. Proud. "What's that?" Tommy asked. He was standing by the front desk, pointing at something behind it. Grace came over and saw what he'd noticed. A locked box, small and metal, partially hidden behind the old guest register. She reached for it and was surprised to find it wasn't locked. Inside was a key, brass, old but well-maintained, and attached to it, a tag with careful handwriting. Suite 7. Suite 7, Grace read aloud. She looked up at the staircase. Upstairs, they climbed carefully, testing each step. The second floor was a long hallway lined with doors, all closed. Room 1, Room 2, Room 3. At the end of the hall, separate from the others, was a door marked with an ornate brass 7. The key fit perfectly. Suite 7 was different from what she'd seen of the rest of the hotel. It was still dusty, still clearly abandoned, but it was also intact. A sitting room with furniture covered in white sheets, a small kitchenette. Beyond that, a bedroom with a massive 4-poster bed and another door that led to a bathroom with a clawfoot tub. "This is amazing," Lily said, pulling a sheet off a chair to reveal burgundy velvet beneath. Grace moved through the suite, feeling lightheaded. On the desk in the sitting room, she found a leather-bound ledger and an envelope with her name on it. With shaking hands, she opened the envelope. "Dear Grace, if you're reading this, then you came. Part of me thought you wouldn't. Thought you'd be too practical, too sensible. But I'm glad I was wrong. You don't know me, and I'm sorry for that. Family politics kept us apart. Old grudges I never had the energy to resolve. But I've kept track of you over the years. I know about David. I know about your children. I know you're struggling. The marigold is yours now. Most people would tell you it's worthless, and by conventional measures, they'd be right. But conventional measures don't account for everything. This hotel has been in our family for 3 generations, and it holds more than just rooms and wooden nails. Look at the ledger, not the columns you'd expect. Those are just for show. Look at what's truly owed. The town has forgotten what we built here, but maybe it's time they remembered. Maybe it's time for the marigold to mean something again. The choice, of course, is yours. You can walk away, sell it for the land, and get what little money you can. No one would blame you. But if you stay, if you're brave enough, stubborn enough, crazy enough to try, then everything you need is already here, including the answer to why I left this to you. Suite 7 is yours. Always has been since the day you were born. I kept it ready waiting. Welcome home, Grace. Your great-uncle, Howard Marsh." Grace read the letter twice, then 3 times. Her hands were trembling. The kids had spread out through the suite, exploring, their voices echoing. She picked up the ledger and flipped it open. The first few pages were standard hotel accounting. Dates, room numbers, charges. But halfway through, the entries changed. Different handwriting, different content. Mrs. Patterson, room 12, stayed 3 nights during her divorce. Left feeling strong enough to start over. The Morrison family, suite 4, anniversary trip, remembered why they fell in love. James Chen, room 8, finished his novel here. Said the quiet helped him find his voice. Sarah and David's wedding, front lawn, 200 guests. Said it was magic. Entry after entry, going back decades. Not financial records, but something else. Stories, memories, lives changed. At the very back, in her great-uncle's handwriting, a single line. This is what the marigold was built for. Not profit, but purpose. Not success, but shelter. Not glory, but grace. Grace, her name, his word for what this place meant. She walked to the window and looked out. From up here, she could see past the decay of the grounds to the valley beyond. Mountains rolled away in every direction, spectacular and wild. The sun was setting, painting everything gold. Behind her, Emma laughed at something Jake said. Tommy was examining the old radio on the desk, and Lily was running her hand over the velvet chair, a small smile on her face. Grace thought about their cramped apartment, about her aching feet and mounting bills, and the suffocating sensation of drowning slowly. She thought about David, who'd never gotten to see his kids grow up because he'd chosen running over staying. She thought about Old Man Patterson and Mrs. Chen and Derek the trucker, all so certain this place was worthless. Maybe they were right. Probably they were right. But standing in Suite 7, holding a letter from a man she'd never met who'd somehow known exactly what she needed, Grace experienced something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. Foolish, reckless, absolutely crazy hope. Have you ever discovered something about your family that completely changed how you saw your past? I'd love to hear about those moments of revelation in the comments. Kids, she said, turning from the window, how would you feel about staying here for a while? 4 pairs of eyes stared at her. Really? Tommy asked. Like living here? Maybe. Possibly. I don't know yet. But this suite is ours. It's clean enough. We could stay tonight at least. Get a feel for the place before we make any decisions. It's like a castle, Emma said, her voice full of wonder. It's like a haunted castle, Jake corrected, but he was grinning. That first night, as darkness fell over the Marigold Hotel, Grace gathered her children in Suite 7. They ate granola bars from her purse and drank water from bottles in the car. They made the 4-poster bed with sheets Grace found in the closet, old but clean, smelling of lavender. And as her children fell asleep, exhausted from the journey and the strangeness of it all, Grace sat by the window and looked out at the silhouette of the hotel against the starlit sky. Somewhere in the building, she heard a sound like wind through empty corridors, or maybe like music played very far away, the faint melody of a piano, ghostly and haunting. Grace should have been afraid, should have grabbed her kids and run back to the car and driven straight home to their little apartment and their known problems and their safe, suffocating existence. Instead, she pulled the ledger close and began to read. Story after story, life after life, all the invisible ways this place had mattered. And somewhere in those pages, in her great-uncle's careful handwriting, she found what she'd been searching for without knowing she was searching. A reason to stay, a reason to fight, a reason to believe that the inheritance nobody wanted might just be exactly what she needed. The next morning brought visitors. Grace woke to the sound of car engines in the driveway. She looked out the window and saw 2 vehicles, a sleek black Mercedes and a silver BMW, parked next to her aging Honda like predators circling prey. She dressed quickly and met the visitors on the front porch. A man and a woman, both expensively dressed, both with the same calculating look in their eyes. Grace Holloway? The man extended his hand. He was in his 50s, silver-haired and polished. I'm Richard Brennan, your cousin. Well, 3rd cousin, technically. We share August Brennan as a great-great-grandfather. The woman stepped forward, tall, elegant, with the kind of perfect appearance that spoke of significant money. Margaret Brennan Clark, I'm so sorry for your loss, dear, and for the burden this place must represent. Grace didn't take either offered hand. I wasn't aware I had cousins. Oh, there are dozens of us, Richard said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The Brennan family's quite extensive. We heard you'd inherited this situation and wanted to reach out immediately. Families should stick together. We understand you're a single mother, Margaret added, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Working multiple jobs, struggling to make ends meet. This building is a disaster, Grace. The cost to repair it would be astronomical, and honestly, it's probably not even safe for children. What exactly are you proposing? Grace asked carefully. A solution, Richard said. We're prepared to take this burden off your shoulders. $500,000 for the property, far more than it's worth in its current condition. You could start fresh somewhere else, give your children a stable life. $500,000. A week ago, that would have seemed like a fortune. But Grace thought about the letter in her pocket, about the ledger full of stories, about Suite 7 that had been kept ready and waiting. That's very generous, she said. I'll need to think about it. Richard's smile tightened. Of course, but don't take too long. Properties like this, well, they have a way of deteriorating rapidly. And there are tax implications you probably haven't considered. The inheritance taxes alone could bankrupt you. Plus the liability issues, Margaret added. If someone gets hurt on this property, you could lose everything you have. They were threatening her, politely, expensively, but threatening nonetheless. I'll keep that in mind, Grace said. Now, if you'll excuse me, my children need breakfast. After they left, Grace found herself shaking. She walked back through the hotel, seeing it through their eyes. The peeling paint, the broken windows, the overwhelming magnitude of what would need to be done. But she also remembered the photograph of her mother, the ledger full of stories, the sensation she'd had standing in Suite 7 of finally being where she belonged. In the kitchen, she found something she'd missed the day before, a business card tucked behind the old cash register. Edwin Carter, Hotel Management. The phone number had a local area code. Edwin Carter turned out to be a man in his late 60s, lean and weathered, with kind eyes and calloused hands. He arrived within an hour of Grace's call, driving a pickup truck that had seen better decades. Worked for Howard for 30 years, he said, looking up at the hotel with obvious emotion. Man was like a father to me. When he got sick, tried to keep working for free, but he was too proud to accept that. Edwin led Grace through the building with the expertise of someone who knew every inch of it. He showed her the structure beneath the decay. Solid construction, quality materials, systems that could be restored rather than replaced. Won't lie to you, he said in the basement, shining his flashlight on the electrical panel. It'll take money, lots of it, but this place. He paused, touching the stone foundation. They don't build them like this anymore. If someone had the vision and the resources, they could bring this back to life. Mr. Carter, Grace said carefully, do you know anything about the Brennan family? About why my great-uncle was estranged from them? Edwin's expression darkened. Howard never told me everything, but I know enough. There was bad blood going back generations. Something about the original will, about who was supposed to inherit what. Howard always suspected some of the family would come circling after he died, like vultures. Richard and Margaret were here this morning. Those two, Edwin's face hardened, been sniffing around for years, making offers, trying to pressure Howard to sell. He wouldn't give them the time of day. Edwin paused, studying Grace's face. Miss Holloway, can I show you something? Something Howard made me promise to show only to his heir? He led her to a section of the basement she hadn't explored yet, behind what looked like a wine cellar. Hidden behind a false wall was a small office, Howard's private study. The desk was covered with papers, blueprints, and journals. Howard spent the last 20 years of his life researching the hotel's history, Edwin explained. He became convinced that something valuable had been hidden here, something that would explain why the family split apart. Grace picked up one of the journals and opened it. The pages were filled with Howard's careful handwriting, documenting his investigation. March 3, 1994, found reference in the original construction documents to a secure storage chamber built during hotel construction. No mention in any blueprints from after the 1896 earthquake. July 15, 1994. Town records show August Brennan made deposits of unusual amounts in Denver banks, amounts that don't correspond to known silver mining yields. October 9, 1995, the sealed chamber. It's there on the original blueprints, but nowhere on the rebuild plans from after the earthquake. A basement level below the basement. But where's the entrance? The 1896 earthquake damaged the access point, and it was deliberately sealed during reconstruction. Grace looked up at Edwin. He was looking for treasure? More than that, Howard believed August Brennan had discovered something in these mountains, something that made him wealthy beyond anything the official records showed. And he thought the family split happened because some members wanted to exploit it, while others wanted to protect it. Edwin handed her another journal. This one more recent, June 12, 2019. The fire in 1973 wasn't an accident. I'm certain now. Someone used the chaos to search for the entrance to the chamber. They failed, but they've been waiting, watching, hoping I'd lead them to it. August 30th, 2020. I've hidden the real clues where only my chosen heir will find them. If something happens to me, if the vultures finally succeed, at least there's a chance the truth will survive. The chamber's entrance was damaged in the 1896 earthquake and sealed afterward. But earthquakes can also reveal what was hidden. Grace absorbed this information, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in her mind. Mr. Carter, how exactly did my great-uncle die? Edwin's jaw tightened. Officially? Heart failure. But Howard was healthy as a horse before those last few months. Started feeling sick right around the time Richard and Margaret increased their visits, bringing him home-cooked meals and such. You think they poisoned him? I think Howard was the only thing standing between them and whatever they're really after. And I think now they're going to come after you. That night, as if summoned by their conversation, the weather turned violent. A storm rolled in from the mountains with the speed and fury that only high-altitude weather could muster. Rain lashed against the windows of Suite 7, and thunder boomed so close it seemed to shake the entire building. Grace had put the children to bed early, all four of them piled into the massive four-poster bed, like puppies seeking warmth. Now she sat at the desk, reading through Howard's journals by lamplight, trying to piece together the mystery he'd spent 20 years investigating. The storm was directly overhead when she heard it, a sound like the building itself was groaning, deep and prolonged. Grace looked up from the journal, her heart hammering. The sound came again, and this time she felt it as much as heard it. A vibration through the floor, as if something massive was shifting beneath her feet. Howard's words echoed in her mind. Earthquakes can also reveal what was hidden. She grabbed a flashlight and made her way carefully down to the lobby. Rain was pouring through several broken windows, and the wind was howling through gaps in the walls like something alive. And then, as lightning illuminated the space, Grace saw it. A section of the wall near the grand staircase was bulging outward. The structural stress from the storm, wind pressure, temperature changes, moisture, had destabilized whatever had been holding the sealed entrance in place for over a century. As she watched, plaster began to crack and fall away in sheets, revealing wooden beams beneath. The wall seemed to pulse outward with each gust of wind. Another crack of thunder, this one so close it felt like the mountain itself was splitting open. The building shuddered, and with a sound like a sigh, an entire section of the wall collapsed inward, revealing what Howard had spent 20 years searching for. Where the wall had been, Grace could see darkness beyond. Not just a hole, but an opening, a passage that had been sealed up during the 1896 reconstruction, hidden behind plaster and wallpaper, forgotten. She should wait until morning, should get Edwin or someone who knew what they were doing. Should definitely not go into a mysterious passage in the middle of a storm in a supposedly cursed hotel. But Grace thought about the bills piled on her kitchen table at home, thought about her children sleeping upstairs in a building she couldn't afford to keep, but couldn't afford to sell, thought about Howard spending 20 years searching for answers. She took a deep breath, checked that her phone was fully charged, and stepped through the opening. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for her shoulders, with stone walls that looked far older than the hotel itself. The air smelled of earth and something else, something metallic, like old coins. Grace's footsteps echoed as she moved forward, her phone light bouncing off the walls. The passage sloped downward, and Grace realized she was descending below the basement, into something that shouldn't exist. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 minutes, the passage opened into a chamber. Grace stopped at the entrance, her breath catching. The chamber was circular, maybe 30 feet across, with walls of fitted stone that looked like they'd been carved from the mountain itself. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on the pedestal, nothing. Whatever had been there was gone. But around the walls, Grace could see markings. Not words exactly, but symbols. Some looked Native American in origin, geometric patterns she'd seen in museums. Others were different, more elaborate, almost like a map or diagram. And on the floor, in the dust that covered everything, Grace saw footprints. Recent footprints. Someone had been here, and not long ago. Grace moved closer to the pedestal, her mind racing. This was what Howard had been looking for. This chamber, hidden beneath the hotel for over a century. But whatever it had protected was gone. She photographed everything with her phone. The symbols on the walls, the empty pedestal, the footprints in the dust. Then she noticed something else. A gap in the stones near the floor, almost like a hiding place. She knelt and reached inside, her fingers closing around something small and cold. A key, brass, old, smaller than the one to Suite 7, and attached to it, a tag with a single word carved into the metal: truth. Thunder boomed overhead, and the mountain itself seemed to shudder. Grace pocketed the key and hurried back through the passage, her mind reeling with possibilities. When she emerged into the lobby, the storm was beginning to subside. The structural damage that had revealed the passage was evident: fallen plaster, exposed beams, the hole where the wall had been. But Grace now understood this wasn't just storm damage. It was revelation. She ran upstairs to Suite 7, checking on the children. Still asleep, thank God, and then sat at the desk, staring at the key in her palm. Truth. She opened Howard's journal again, flipping through more carefully this time, looking for any mention of a key. And there near the end, she found it. If someone is reading this, if you found the chamber and it's empty, and I believe it will be empty because I believe it was empty the night of the fire, then you need to find the key. I never could. I searched every inch of this hotel, but it wasn't here. Or maybe I just couldn't see it. Maybe I was looking for the wrong thing. The key will open the safe in the honeymoon suite. I sealed it myself the day after the fire, after I realized what had happened. I couldn't bear to look at what was inside, couldn't bear the proof of what I'd failed to protect. But someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand what was lost. I hope whoever finds this has the courage I lacked. Grace stared at the words, her wet hair dripping onto the page. The safe in the honeymoon suite, the key in her hand. Outside, the storm raged on, and somewhere in the building, that phantom piano played its melancholy tune. Or perhaps it was just the wind through empty corridors. Grace looked toward the door of Suite 7, where her children slept peacefully, unaware that their mother had just discovered a hidden chamber and a key that supposedly opened a sealed safe and was maybe, possibly, completely losing her mind. But she also looked at Howard's journals, at the evidence of his 20-year obsession, at the systematic way he documented everything. This wasn't the work of a madman. This was the work of someone who'd known exactly what he was looking for. Tomorrow, when the storm passed and her children woke, she would find that safe. She would discover what had been hidden for 50 years, what someone had killed for, what Howard had spent his life trying to understand. The morning after the storm dawned clear and perfect. Sunlight spilled across the valley, the mountains sharp against a brilliant blue sky. Grace woke to find evidence of the storm's power everywhere. Broken branches, scattered debris, and in the lobby, the gaping hole where the wall had been. But the passage was still there, still real. Grace fed the children cereal she'd bought in town and explained that she needed to do some exploring, alone. They were content to play in Suite 7, having already begun to adapt to their strange new circumstances with the resilience that children possessed. The honeymoon suite was on the 3rd floor, a corner room that must have once been magnificent. Now it was water-damaged and neglected, but Grace could still see traces of its former grandeur: hand-painted wallpaper, a marble fireplace, French doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking the valley. And there, built into the wall, was a safe, old, massive, and welded shut. Grace ran her fingers over the metal seams, crude welds that looked like they'd been done in a hurry. The safe door had a combination lock, but it didn't matter. The welds meant it couldn't be opened without cutting equipment, except Grace looked more closely and found what Howard's journal had hinted at: a secondary keyhole hidden beneath where the welds had been applied. Someone had welded the safe shut, but they'd left the emergency key access intact, probably not knowing it existed. The brass key slid into the hidden lock with a click that sounded impossibly loud. Grace gripped the handle and pulled. The safe door swung open with a groan of protest, hinges that hadn't moved in over 50 years finally giving way. Inside was a leather satchel, bulging with contents, and a wooden box about the size of a shoebox. Grace lifted out the satchel first and set it on the floor, then the box. Her fingers trembled as she unbuckled the satchel and looked inside. Documents. Dozens of them. Legal papers, certificates, deeds. She pulled out the first one and began to read, her eyes moving faster and faster across the page. The Brennan Family Trust, established by August Brennan in 1876, with the purpose of protecting assets from seizure and ensuring the prosperity of future generations. She pulled out another document, a deed showing that the Marigold Hotel wasn't just a hotel. It was the flagship property of a portfolio that included mining rights, timber rights, water rights, and land holdings across 3 states. Another document, a list of assets dated 1972, the year before the fire. The total value made Grace's vision swim. $200 million. That's not possible, she whispered to herself. But there was more. She pulled out a letter, handwritten, addressed to whoever finds this. The handwriting was Howard's, but shaky, as if written in great distress. When facing a major life decision, do you tend to play it safe or take risks? I'd love to know what guides your choices. Share in the comments below. If you're reading this, then the worst has happened. The fire has occurred and someone has breached the chamber. They've taken the original trust documents, the ones that prove the unbroken chain of ownership from August Brennan through my mother to me. What they don't know is that I kept copies, hidden copies, in the one place they'd never think to look, sealed in the safe they all assumed held the hotel's petty cash and insurance papers. The person who started the fire was family. I know it in my bones. One of the cousins who felt cheated when the trust passed to me instead of being divided. They wanted to steal the trust documents and rewrite the chain of ownership, cut me out, take control of the assets. But they failed. The documents they stole from the chamber were decoys, copies I'd placed there years ago when I first suspected someone in the family was planning something. The real documents are here. The Brennan Family Trust is worth far more than anyone realizes. The assets have been carefully managed, conservatively invested, hidden from public record. The hotel was never meant to make money. It was meant to be a steward, a guardian, a place where the controlling trustee would live and oversee everything. But I'm old and I'm tired, and I've been fighting vultures for decades. The town turned on me after the fire. My own family tried to steal from me. I've kept this secret alone for too long, so I'm leaving it to Grace. Not because she's blood, though she is, but because she's the only one who ever saw me as a person instead of a bank account. Grace wrote to me once when she was 8 years old, a letter in crayon with flowers drawn in the corners. She'd heard from her grandmother that I lived alone, and she wanted me to know that someone was thinking of me. She asked if I was lonely, She told me about her favorite foods and her hopes for the future. She signed it, Your Friend Grace. I kept that letter for 26 years. It's in the wooden box. She doesn't remember writing it. She was too young. But I remember. And when I heard that she'd lost her husband, that she was struggling with 4 children and no way forward, I knew. I knew she was the one who would understand that wealth means nothing without compassion. That assets are just numbers unless they're used to build something meaningful. Grace, if you're reading this, the trust is yours. All of it. The documents here prove it beyond any legal doubt. But be warned, the family will come. They've been circling for decades, waiting for me to die so they could pick the bones. They don't know about these copies. They think they destroyed the only proof. You'll have to fight. But I believe you can win. I believe you're strong enough, smart enough, and stubborn enough to finish what I couldn't. Restore the Marigold. Use the trust the way August Brennan intended. To build, not to extract. To create, not to consume. And know that you were never alone. I was always watching, always caring, always hoping you'd come home. Your great-uncle Howard Grace's vision blurred with tears. 8 years old. She'd written him a letter. She had the vaguest memory of it. Her grandmother mentioning someone named Howard who lived alone in the mountains. Grace had felt sad for him and had wanted to send something cheerful. She'd forgotten all about it by the next week. But he'd remembered. For 26 years, he'd remembered. She reached for the wooden box and opened it carefully. Inside, exactly as Howard had said, was a letter in crayon on construction paper, yellowed with age. The flowers in the corners were crooked and enthusiastic. The handwriting was large and uneven, with backward letters and creative spelling. Dear Uncle Howard, Grandma said you live alone in the mountains. Are you lonely? I am Grace. I am 8 years old. I have a dog named Pickles. My favorite food is mac and cheese. When I grow up, I want to help people. I hope you are happy. I am thinking of you. Your friend Grace. She'd drawn a smiley face at the bottom and a stick figure she'd labeled you, standing next to a stick figure labeled me. Grace clutched the letter to her chest and sobbed. All the grief of the past 2 years, all the fear and exhaustion and desperation came pouring out. When she finally composed herself, she set the letter gently back in the box and returned to the satchel. There were more documents, statements showing the trust's current value, account numbers, contact information for the law firm that had been managing the assets all these years. Everything she'd need to claim her inheritance. $247 million. The number was incomprehensible. More than Grace had ever dreamed of. Enough to fix the hotel 100 times over, enough to secure her children's futures, to never worry about rent or medical bills, or whether she could afford to buy them winter coats. Enough to change everything. But it wasn't the money that made her hands shake as she gathered the documents. It was the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that Howard had spent his whole life protecting this trust, fighting off relatives who saw only dollar signs, trying to honor some promise made by August Brennan over a century ago. And now it was hers. Grace spent the rest of the morning in the honeymoon suite, going through every document. The Brennan family trust controlled the Marigold Hotel and 300 acres of surrounding land mining rights to 3 silver mines, currently inactive but with significant remaining reserves, timber rights to 5,000 acres of old-growth forest, water rights to Crystal River and its tributaries, commercial properties in 6 different cities, a diversified investment portfolio managed by a Boston firm, and something Grace didn't fully understand, controlling shares in a railroad that had been converted to a heritage railway. The total current value, according to the most recent statement, $247,600,000. Grace had to sit down when she read that number. By noon, she'd made her decision. That afternoon, cars began arriving at the Marigold like a hostile invasion. First Richard's Mercedes, then Margaret's BMW. then two other vehicles Grace didn't recognize. They parked in the overgrown circular drive with the confidence of people who thought they'd already won. Grace met them on the front porch, the trust documents securely hidden back in the safe. "Grace!" Richard's voice carried false cheerfulness. "We've brought reinforcements. I'd like you to meet our lawyer, Stuart Finch, and our property appraiser, Janet Mills." The lawyer was thin and sharp-featured, with the predatory look of someone who made a living from other people's desperation. The appraiser was middle-aged and stern, already making notes on a clipboard. "We've been thinking about your situation," Margaret said, her voice dripping sympathy, "and we've decided to increase our offer. $750,000, more than generous for a property in this condition. We've also taken the liberty of having Mr. Finch prepare the paperwork," Richard added. "We know this must all be overwhelming for you. We'd like to make the process as simple as possible." Grace looked at them, four people in expensive clothes standing on her porch, trying to steal from her what they'd failed to steal from Howard. "That's very kind," she said carefully, "but I've decided not to sell." The false friendliness vanished from their faces like masks being stripped away. "Don't be foolish, Grace," Margaret said, her voice hardening. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. This property will bankrupt you. The repairs alone will cost millions. Not to mention the legal challenges," Stuart Finch added smoothly. "There are questions about the legitimacy of Howard's will, questions about his mental state in his final years, questions that could tie up this property in court for years, questions that could leave you with nothing," Richard said, "nothing but legal bills and a worthless ruin." They were threatening her again, but this time Grace wasn't afraid. "I think you should leave," she said quietly. "Grace?" Richard's voice took on a dangerous edge. "You're making a serious mistake. We're family. We're trying to help you." "Family," Grace repeated. "Like you helped Howard?" The silence that followed was thick and charged. "I don't know what you think you know," Margaret said slowly, "but I know you killed him." The words came out of Grace's mouth before she could stop them. Richard took a step back. "That's a serious accusation." "It's also the truth." Grace felt strength flowing through her, the strength that came from finally understanding. "Howard was healthy until his last few months, until you started visiting more frequently, bringing him food." "You can't prove anything," Stuart Finch said quickly. "Maybe not, but I can try." That evening, alone in Suite 7 with her children asleep, Grace made a phone call to the law firm in Boston that had been managing the trust. Her hands shook as she dialed the number from the documents. Gerald Morrison answered on the third ring. He was in his 70s, his voice gravelly with age but sharp with intelligence. "Morrison and Associates." "Mr. Morrison, this is Grace Holloway. I believe you've been managing a trust for my great-uncle, Howard Marsh." There was a long pause. "Miss Holloway," Gerald said carefully, "I've been waiting for this call for 3 years. You knew about me. Howard updated his will to include you as his heir in 2020. He was very specific about the instructions. The trust was to pass to you upon his death, but only if you claimed it in person within 60 days of notification. And if I didn't, then it was to be liquidated and donated to charity. Howard was adamant that the trust should never fall into the hands of what he called the vultures." Grace took a breath. "Mr. Morrison, I need to ask you something. Do you think Howard was murdered?" Another pause. "That's a serious question, Miss Holloway." "It's a serious situation. Howard called me 2 weeks before he died," Gerald said slowly. "He was convinced someone was poisoning him. I urged him to go to the police, but he said he needed proof first. He never got the chance. What would it take to get an investigation started? Evidence. Something concrete. The kind of evidence that would convince a prosecutor to exhume a body and order toxicology tests. Grace thought about the hidden recording devices Howard had mentioned in his journals, about the security system Edwin had installed but never mentioned to the family. I might be able to find that evidence. Miss Holloway, Gerald's voice became urgent. If Howard was right, if his death wasn't natural, then you're in danger too. These people, if they killed once, they might kill again. Then I guess I'd better work fast. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of activity. Grace hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Carol Hayes who specialized in suspicious deaths. She contacted the coroner's office about exhuming Howard's body. She reached out to the FBI's white-collar crime division, and in Howard's hidden office, she found what she was looking for. Hidden behind a false panel in the desk was a digital recording device, voice-activated, that had been running for months before Howard's death. On it were dozens of conversations, Richard and Margaret discussing their plans, Dr. James Morrison, who turned out to be Stuart Finch's cousin, talking about gradually increasing Howard's medication, discussions of what they would do with the hotel once Howard was gone. And on the final recording, made just 3 days before Howard's death, Richard's voice was crystal clear. "The old fool is taking too long to die. Maybe it's time for a more direct approach." Grace sat in the basement office, listening to her great-uncle's murderers plan his death, and she felt something inside her harden into steel. The arrest happened on a Friday morning. Grace watched from the window of Suite 7 as FBI agents and local police surrounded the hotel. Richard and Margaret were taken into custody at their respective homes. Dr. Morrison was arrested at his clinic. Stuart Finch was picked up at his law office. The charges included conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, attempted fraud, and murder in the first degree. Within a week, the story was national news. The mysterious death of a hotel owner, the hidden trust worth hundreds of millions, the family conspiracy to steal it all. It had everything the media loved. Grace hired the best criminal defense attorney she could find, not for herself, but to make sure the prosecution didn't make any mistakes that would allow the killers to escape justice. The legal proceedings took 8 months, but the evidence was overwhelming. One by one, the conspirators broke down and confessed. Richard had orchestrated everything, driven by a lifetime of jealousy over Howard's inheritance. Margaret had provided the medical expertise through her connection to Dr. Morrison. Stuart Finch had planned to alter the trust documents once Howard was dead. They had killed a good man for money they were never entitled to. In the end, Richard was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Margaret received 25 years. Dr. Morrison got 15 years, and Stuart Finch received 10 years as an accessory after the fact. Justice was served, but for Grace, justice was only the beginning. With the legal battles resolved and the trust officially transferred to her control, Grace began the work Howard had dreamed of, restoring the Marigold Hotel. She hired the best restoration team money could buy, architects and craftsmen who specialized in historic properties. The work took 2 years and cost $14 million, but when it was finished, the Marigold was more beautiful than it had ever been. 32 guest rooms, each uniquely decorated, but all maintaining the Victorian elegance of the original design. A spa that took advantage of the natural hot springs Grace had discovered on the property. A restaurant that showcased local ingredients and attracted visitors from across the region. But the heart of the new Marigold was something Howard would have loved. A foundation Grace established to provide free stays for families in crisis. Single mothers rebuilding their lives, families recovering from natural disasters, anyone who needed a place to heal and start over. The hotel opened to the public in June, exactly 3 years after Grace had first arrived. The guest list for the opening ceremony included governors and senators, celebrities and business leaders. But the people Grace was proudest to see were the local families who had found work at the hotel, the residents of Millbrook whose town had come back to life around it. Edwin Carter, Now in his 70s but still sharp as a tack, served as the hotel's general manager. The children, Tommy now 15, Lily 13, Jake 10, and Emma 8, had grown up in the hotel, confident and compassionate children who understood that their good fortune came with responsibility. And Grace had become something she never imagined she could be: a successful businesswoman, a philanthropist, a pillar of her community. But more importantly, she had become the woman that 8-year-old girl in the crayon letter had wanted to be. Someone who helped people. On the night of the grand opening, after all the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Grace walked through the hotel alone. Every room was perfect, every surface gleaming, every detail exactly as it should be. She ended her walk in Suite 7, which remained her family's private residence. On the desk, in a place of honor, sat Howard's leather-bound ledger, but now it contained new entries, not financial records, but stories. The Martinez family, Suite 12, stayed 6 weeks after losing their home in a wildfire, left with a plan to rebuild and the confidence to start over. Sarah Chen, room 8, completed her master's degree while staying here after leaving an abusive relationship. Graduated summa cum laude, the Williams family, Suite 15, spent 3 months here while their daughter received cancer treatment at Denver Children's Hospital. Daughter is now in remission. They sent a photo from her graduation. Story after story, life after life, all the invisible ways the marigold was fulfilling its purpose. Grace picked up her pen and added one more entry. Grace Holloway and her 4 children, Suite 7, arrived broken and desperate. Learned that sometimes the inheritance nobody wants is exactly what everybody needs. Learn that home isn't a place you're born to, but a place you choose to build. Learn that the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in lives touched, hearts healed, and hope restored. She set down the pen and walked to the window. Outside, the Marigold Hotel glowed against the mountain darkness. Every window warm with light, every room ready to welcome whoever needed shelter. The ghost piano had stopped playing its melancholy tune years ago. The whispers in the walls had quieted to contented sighs. The Marigold Hotel was alive again, and this time, it would never be abandoned. But there was one more thing Grace needed to do. The next morning, she drove to the small cemetery on the outskirts of Millbrook, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers and Howard's original letter. His grave was simple, just a stone marker with his name and dates. No family had come to his funeral. No one had mourned him except Edwin. Grace knelt beside the headstone and placed the flowers gently in the grass. "I found it, Uncle Howard," she said softly. "I found what you were protecting, and I understand now why you chose me. Not because I was family, but because you saw something in a little girl's letter that even she didn't know was there." She pulled out the crayon letter, now carefully preserved in a frame, and propped it against the headstone. "You were never alone, and neither was I. You were watching over me my whole life, weren't you? Making sure I'd be ready when the time came." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Grace closed her eyes and felt something she could only describe as peace. "The marigold is alive again," she said, "just like you dreamed. And every person we help, every life we touch, every story we add to that ledger, it's all because you had the courage to wait for the right person instead of giving up." She stood brushing dirt from her knees and looked out at the valley below, where the Marigold Hotel stood tall and proud against the mountains. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing who I could become before I knew it myself." Grace thought about Howard, about the letter he'd left her, about the trust he'd protected his entire life. He'd written that the Marigold was built for purpose, not profit, for shelter, not success, for grace. Standing there in the morning sunlight, surrounded by the mountains he'd loved and protected, Grace finally understood what he'd meant. The inheritance nobody wanted had become the gift everyone needed. The broken-down hotel had become a sanctuary. The desperate single mother had become a guardian of hope. And Grace Holloway, who had once thought her story was ending, had discovered that sometimes the most beautiful chapters begin when you think the book is closed. Looking back on your own life, what unexpected gifts have you discovered in places you least expected them? Share your stories of finding treasure in unlikely places. I believe every one of us has experienced this kind of grace. The Marigold Hotel stood tall and proud against the Colorado sky, its windows blazing with light, its doors open wide, ready to welcome anyone who needed healing, who needed hope, who needed to discover that even in the darkest times, grace can be found. The woman nobody expected had brought it all to life, and the story was just beginning.